I still remember the way she used to look at me. Her eyes lit up every time I walked into the room. Her laugh was like a melody that played just for me, and her touch felt like home. Back then, I thought we had it all. We were the couple everyone envied. Two people madly in love, building dreams together, and planning a future that seemed so full of promise. We talked about kids often, names even, and imagined what our family would look like. It was the perfect life, or so I thought. But life has a way of shattering illusions when you least expect it. It started with the routine doctor's visit. We had been trying for over a year, and she was growing impatient. I could see the disappointment in her eyes every month when the pregnancy test came back negative. At first, I thought it was bad timing or stress. But deep down, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that something might be wrong. That voice turned into a reality the day the doctor gave me the news. Infertile. The word hit me like a freight train. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I remember sitting there, staring at the doctor as he explained the tests and the diagnosis, but all I heard was that one word echoing in my mind. Infertile. How was I supposed to tell her? How could I admit that I was the one standing in the way of our dreams? I went home that evening, rehearsing the words over and over in my head. When I finally told her, her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't cry or yell. She didn't even seem angry. She just stared at me, her face unreadable, and said, "Oh." That was it. No words of comfort, no reassurance that we'd figure it out together. Just an "oh" that hung in the air like a noose. I told myself she needed time to process it, just like I did. But time didn't heal the wound. It only made it fester. In the weeks that followed, she stopped mentioning children altogether. At first, I was relieved, grateful that we weren't having painful conversations about something I couldn't fix. But then, I started noticing the little things. The way her touch became less frequent, her smiles less genuine. The way she started avoiding me, spending more time at work or with her friends. The way she looked at me, not with love, but with something that felt a lot like resentment. And then came the jabs. "You've put on some weight," she'd say, her tone casual but cutting. "Maybe you should try being more productive. It might help." At first, I laughed it off, telling myself she was just stressed or joking. But the comments kept coming, each one chipping away at my confidence, my sense of worth. I started questioning everything. Was I not good enough for her anymore? Did she regret marrying me? Still, I clung to hope. I told myself it was just a rough patch, that every marriage had its ups and downs. I made excuses for her behavior, convinced myself that we'd find our way back to each other. I planned date nights, tried to surprise her with little gifts, even suggested counseling. But nothing worked. She was pulling away, and I couldn't stop her. Looking back, I can see how blind I was. How desperate I was to hold on to the life I thought we had. But at the time, I couldn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface. I was too busy pretending everything was fine, too afraid to admit that the perfect life I had built in my mind was crumbling around me. I should have seen the signs. The way she stopped looking me in the eye, the way her laughter no longer echoed through our home, the way she avoided conversations about the future. But I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to face the truth, that the woman I loved, the woman I had promised to build a life with, was slipping away from me. I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. The morning she told me about the girls' trip, I remember thinking it was a little out of character. She wasn't the type to travel without meticulously planning months in advance, especially for something like this. But there she was, sitting across from me at the breakfast table, her voice oddly casual as she said, "I need a break. The girls and I are planning a trip to America, just for a week or two." I blinked at her, caught off guard. America? That's far. When did this come up? She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. It was last minute. They've been talking about it for a while, and I figured, why not? I need to clear my head. I wanted to ask her more, about the timing, the suddenness of it all. But something about the way she said it made me hesitate. She sounded tired, like she was asking for permission to breathe. So, I nodded, masking my confusion with a supportive smile. "Of course. You deserve it." She looked up then, and for the first time in a long while, there was a softness in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her tone almost sincere. "I'll send you the details once everything's finalized." Over the next few days, she busied herself with preparations. Suitcases appeared out of nowhere, filled with neatly packed outfits and shoes. She spent hours on her phone, laughing softly at texts and jotting down notes in her planner. It felt strange, watching her come alive for something that didn't include me. But I kept my concerns to myself, telling myself this trip might be what she needed to reset, to find her way back to us. The morning of her flight, I drove her to the airport. She kissed me on the cheek before stepping out of the car, her lips lingering for a moment longer than usual. "I'll call you when I land," she said, her voice soft but distant. Then she was gone, disappearing into the bustling crowd with her suitcase in tow. I waited for the call. It was an 8-hour flight, so I gave her plenty of time to settle in. But as the hours stretched into the night, worry began to gnaw at me. I checked my phone constantly, convincing myself I must have missed her message. When I finally called her, it went straight to voicemail. The first time, I told myself it was probably bad reception. The second and third times, I started to panic. By the next morning, I was pacing the living room, my phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline. I tried calling her friends, but none of them seemed to know about the trip. "She didn't mention anything to me," one of them said, her voice laced with confusion. Another friend laughed nervously, suggesting, maybe she just needed a solo adventure? Solo? That word sent a chill down my spine. Something wasn't adding up. The next call I made was to the airline. I gave them her name, the flight details she had mentioned, and waited as the agent on the other end tapped away at her keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir," she finally said. "There's no record of a passenger by that name on the flight." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Are you sure? Can you check again?" She did, but the answer didn't change. My wife hadn't boarded the flight. She hadn't gone to America. She had lied. For a moment, I just stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, the agent's polite apologies fading into the background. My mind raced with questions, each one more frantic than the last. If she wasn't with her friends, then where was she? And why hadn't she told me the truth? The following days were a blur of unanswered calls, sleepless nights, and growing dread. Her family was just as clueless as I was, their concern mirroring my own. "She's never done anything like this before," her mother said, her voice trembling. What if something happened to her? What if something had? The thought haunted me, filling every quiet moment with fear. But as the hours turned into days, another possibility began to take root, one that I didn't want to entertain but couldn't ignore. What if she hadn't disappeared? What if she had left? The idea felt like a betrayal in itself, but the evidence was there, staring me in the face. The carefully packed suitcase, the sudden decision to leave, the absence of any real explanation. She hadn't been taken. She hadn't been lost. She had chosen to go, and she hadn't looked back. For years, I had clung to hope, convincing myself that our marriage could survive anything. But as I sat in the empty house, surrounded by the echoes of her absence, I realized I had been wrong. Whatever we had was gone, and the woman I thought I knew had taken it with her. The days after her disappearance felt like drowning in slow motion. Every morning, I woke up hoping it had been a nightmare, that I'd roll over and see her next to me, her hair spilling over the pillow. But the bed was always empty, a cold reminder of the gaping hole she'd left behind. I threw myself into finding answers. I replayed every conversation, every fleeting glance, every detail of her sudden departure. The questions were relentless. Had she left because of me? Because I couldn't give her the life she wanted? Did she ever truly love me? Or was I just a placeholder until something, or someone, better came along? Her family was no help. Her mother, always overbearing, oscillated between anger and concern. "She wouldn't do this without a reason," she snapped during one of our tense phone calls. "You must have pushed her too far." Her father, quieter but equally judgmental, added, "Maybe you should have tried harder to make her happy." Their words stung, confirming the fears I had buried deep within. I tried therapy, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The sleepless nights and gnawing anxiety were slowly eating me alive. My therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Miller, listened patiently as I spilled everything. The infertility, her growing distance, the lies. "You need to stop blaming yourself," she said during one session, her tone gentle but firm. "Her actions are not a reflection of your worth." But how could I not blame myself? I was the one who failed. I was the one who couldn't give her the family she dreamed of. And yet, as the weeks turned into months, something began to shift. Therapy forced me to confront the harsh truths I had been avoiding. Yes, I had my flaws, but so did she. Her coldness, her cutting remarks, her choice to walk away without so much as an explanation, those were not my burdens to bear. I began to see her departure not as a loss, but as an opportunity. Slowly, I started rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, taking on projects that reignited my passion. I reconnected with old friends, the kind who didn't ask uncomfortable questions or offer empty platitudes. Weekends became a time for rediscovery, hiking trails I had always meant to explore, reading books that had gathered dust on my shelves, and cooking meals for one without feeling sorry for myself. The house, once a shrine to our life together, transformed into a space that felt like mine. I removed her photographs from the walls, packed away her belongings, and repainted the living room a bold shade of blue she would have hated. It was cathartic, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. Still, there were moments when the loneliness crept in, uninvited and unrelenting. Late at night, when the silence was deafening, I'd find myself scrolling through old photos, her smile taunting me from the screen. On those nights, the anger flared, the kind of anger that leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. How dare she do this to me? To us? But even the anger began to fade with time. The hurt, the betrayal. It all dulled to a quiet ache, a scar I carried but no longer bled from. Life didn't stop just because she had walked away, and neither could I. As the months turned into years, I began to find joy in the smallest of things. The warmth of the sun on my face during an early morning walk, the satisfaction of a job well done, the laughter shared with friends over a meal. These moments, though fleeting, reminded me that I was still capable of happiness, even without her. Every now and then, her memory would surface, like a ripple in still water. I'd catch myself wondering where she was, what she was doing, if she ever thought about me. But those thoughts no longer consumed me. They were just passing ghosts, remnants of a life I had left behind. By the second year, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. It wasn't the absence of pain, but the acceptance of it. I could acknowledge what happened without being defined by it. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. To move forward, to heal, to live. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I was no longer the man who begged for answers or lost himself in the what-ifs. I was someone stronger, someone who had faced the storm and come out on the other side. I didn't know it then, but this newfound peace was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I remember it vividly because I had just returned from work, kicking off my shoes and sinking into the couch with a sense of calm I'd grown accustomed to. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful kind of silence, one that I had come to appreciate after years of chaos. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, almost hesitant. I frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 8 p.m., too late for deliveries or casual visitors. The second knock came louder, more insistent, cutting through the stillness of the house. I opened the door, and there she was. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating, that my mind was playing some cruel trick on me. But it was her, standing on my porch, looking like a ghost from a past life I had buried long ago. Her hair was longer, her face a little more lined, but her eyes, those were the same. They held a mixture of hesitation and something else I couldn't quite place. And then I saw the baby. She cradled the child in her arms, its tiny face peeking out from beneath a pastel blanket. My stomach churned, a wave of emotions crashing over me. Shock, confusion, anger. "Hi," she said softly, her voice tentative, almost shy. "Can I come in?" I stood there, frozen. The rational part of me screamed to slam the door in her face, to tell her to go back to wherever she had come from. But curiosity, or maybe some lingering sense of obligation, got the better of me. I stepped aside, wordlessly allowing her in. She walked in slowly, as if testing the waters, her eyes darting around the living room. It looked different now, stripped of all traces of her. I wondered if she noticed. I followed her to the couch, where she sat down carefully, the baby nestled in her arms. She looked up at me then, her eyes searching mine. "I know I have no right to be here," she began, her voice trembling, but I didn't know where else to go. I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "You've got 5 minutes," I said coldly. She flinched at my tone but nodded. "I owe you an explanation. For everything." I didn't respond, letting the silence stretch. She took a deep breath and launched into her story. She told me about the day she left, how she felt trapped in a marriage that wasn't giving her what she wanted. She spoke about her desperation for a child, how it consumed her until she couldn't think straight. And then came the part that made my stomach turn. "There was someone else," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I met him at a conference. He was everything I thought I needed at the time. He promised me a fresh start, a family. And for a while, it seemed like he could actually give me those things." I felt the air leave my lungs, the weight of her words sinking in. She had left me for another man, a man who, apparently, had given her the one thing I never could. "But it didn't last," she continued, her tone bitter. "He left as soon as he found out I was pregnant. He said he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility." She paused, glancing down at the baby, who was now sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "I was selfish and I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to comprehend. But I've changed. I've had time to reflect, to grow. And now, all I want is a chance to make things right." I stared at her, disbelief and anger swirling in my chest. "Make things right?" I repeated, my voice low. "You think showing up here with a baby and a sob story is enough to erase what you did?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I know it's not, but I'm begging you to give me a chance. For us, for him." She gestured to the baby, as if the child were some kind of olive branch. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You want me to forgive you? To play daddy to a child that isn't even mine?" "I want us to try again," she said, her voice pleading. "We can be a family, a real family. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway." For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her. Part of me wanted to throw her out, to slam the door on this chapter of my life once and for all. But another part, the part that had loved her, that had once dreamed of a family with her, hesitated. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, waiting for my response. But all I could feel was the weight of her betrayal, the years of pain and loneliness she had left me to endure. I took a deep breath, my decision crystallizing in that moment. "You need to leave," I said, my voice firm. Her face crumbled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this. Don't turn your back on us." "There is no us," I said coldly. "Not anymore." She sobbed quietly, clutching the baby as she rose to her feet. "I'm sorry," she said one last time before walking out the door. As I watched her leave, a strange sense of relief washed over me. This time, I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one letting go. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, staring at the empty space where she had just been. My mind raced, replaying every word she had said. She left because she wanted a child. She found someone else who could give her that. And now, she had the audacity to return, hoping I'd clean up the mess her choices had created. For hours, I paced the living room, the sound of her voice echoing in my head. "I made a mistake," she had said, as if that somehow absolved her. A mistake? No. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. What she did was deliberate, a calculated betrayal that ripped my life apart. By the time the sun began to rise, I knew I needed more than the vague story she had given me. Her reappearance had stirred questions I couldn't ignore. Why now? Why me? And what wasn't she telling me? The answers came sooner than I expected. Later that day, she called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity, or maybe some twisted sense of closure, compelled me to answer. Her voice on the other end was hesitant, almost fragile. "Can we talk?" she asked. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When she arrived, the baby wasn't with her. For that, I was grateful. I couldn't handle the sight of him, a living reminder of everything she had taken from me. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Why are you here?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She flinched but didn't look away. "Because I don't have anyone else," she admitted. "And because I owe you the truth." I folded my arms, leaning against the wall. "Then start talking." She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I left because I was scared," she began. "I felt trapped in a marriage that wasn't what I thought it would be. When we found out about the infertility, I don't know, I panicked. I wanted a family so badly, and it felt like that dream was slipping away." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had felt the same fear, the same sense of loss, but I stayed. I fought. She ran. "I met someone," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "At first, it was innocent, just someone to talk to, someone who made me feel seen. But it escalated." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay silent. "When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it was the answer to everything," she said, her voice breaking. "But he didn't want a child. He told me it wasn't part of the deal, that he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. So, he left." I laughed bitterly. "And now you're here, back at square one." She looked up then, tears streaming down her face. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I hurt you in ways I can never undo. But I'm here because I have nowhere else to go, and because a part of me still believes in what we had." I shook my head, the anger bubbling to the surface. "You believe in what we had? You destroyed what we had. You tore it apart the moment you decided I wasn't good enough for you." She flinched, her tears falling harder. "I was selfish," she admitted. "I thought I was chasing happiness, but all I did was ruin everything. I see that now." There it was, the truth I had been waiting for. She had left because she thought the grass was greener on the other side, only to find it was nothing but weeds. And now, she wanted to come back, hoping I'd be the safety net to catch her fall. "I can't do this," I said, my voice firm. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. I won't be your second option, your backup plan." Her face crumpled, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this. Don't shut me out." I stood my ground, the weight of years of pain and betrayal pressing down on me. "You shut me out the moment you walked away," I said coldly, "and now it's my turn." She left shortly after that, her apologies and pleas falling on deaf ears. As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and, most unexpectedly, relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I was reclaiming control over my life. Her truth, as painful as it was, had given me the clarity I needed. I didn't owe her forgiveness. I didn't owe her anything. She had made her bed. Now, she would have to lie in it. I thought I had seen the last of her after that day. The house felt lighter without her presence, her voice, or her constant pleading. For the first time since she'd reappeared, I could breathe. But, of course, she wasn't done with me yet. It started with text messages, then calls. At first, I ignored them. What more could she possibly want? I had been clear. There was no future for us, no chance of reconciliation. Yet, her persistence was relentless. "Please, just hear me out," one text read. "I'm not giving up on us," said another. Us. She kept using that word like it still meant something. Each message felt like a jab, reopening wounds I was trying to heal. And then she showed up. It was late evening, and I was in the middle of cooking dinner when the banging started on the door. Not a polite knock, but a series of sharp, insistent thuds that made my heart race. I set the spatula down, wiped my hands, and went to the door, already bracing myself for the storm. When I opened it, there she was, standing on the porch with fire in her eyes. Gone was the tearful, apologetic woman from before. This version of her was angry, desperate, and unhinged. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. "Excuse me?" I said, spinning around to face her. You don't just get to barge in here. Why are you doing this? She interrupted, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and frustration. Why are you being so cruel? I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the room. Cruel? You think I'm being cruel? You lied to me, cheated on me, and then left me to pick up the pieces of my life while you ran off to chase your fantasies. And now you think I'm cruel for not letting you waltz back in like nothing happened? Her face flushed, her hands balling into fists at her sides. I've apologized. I've admitted my mistakes. What more do you want from me? I don't want anything from you, I shot back. That's the point. I'm done with you. There's no us. There hasn't been for years. She shook her head, her voice rising. You're so focused on punishing me that you can't see what's right in front of you. We could have a second chance, a fresh start. Don't you want that? Don't you want a family? I froze, her words cutting deeper than I expected. Of course, I wanted a family. I had dreamed of it for years, even before we got married. But not like this. Not with her. No, I said firmly. Not like this. Not with you. Her face twisted with anger. You're selfish, she spat. You're so consumed by your own pain that you can't see how much I've changed. Do you know how hard it's been for me? Raising a child on my own, struggling to make ends meet? I could have taken everything during the divorce, but I didn't. I left you with the house, the money, everything. And this is how you repay me? I stared at her, stunned by the audacity of her words. Repay you? I said incredulously. You think I owe you something for not completely ruining my life? Unbelievable. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You're going to regret this. One day, you'll wake up and realize you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you. I met her gaze, unflinching. The best thing that ever happened to me walked out that door years ago. And now, I'm finally free of her. Her eyes flashed with fury, but before she could respond, I pointed to the door. Leave. Now. And don't come back. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing heavily, her face a mask of rage and hurt. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, staring at the closed door, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't until I heard the sound of her car engine fading into the distance that I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. This time, I knew it was over. There would be no more second chances, no more apologies or pleas for forgiveness. She had shown me exactly who she was, and I had finally found the strength to walk away. For the first time, I felt truly free. Free from her lies, her manipulation, and the weight of a broken marriage I had carried for far too long. And as I turned back to the kitchen to finish making dinner, I realized that I wasn't just moving on. I was moving forward. I thought closing the door on her would be the end of it. I thought I could finally put her and the mess she brought with her behind me. But life has a funny way of testing you, especially when you think you've found peace. It started subtly. First, a few texts from mutual acquaintances, friends I hadn't heard from in years. The messages were carefully worded, but the intent was clear. She's struggling, you know? Raising a child alone isn't easy. She's been through a lot. Maybe you should consider helping her out. Helping her out. The words left a bitter taste in my mouth. Where were these people when I was drowning in the wreckage of our marriage? When I was left to pick up the pieces of a life she shattered? Now, they wanted me to swoop in and save her, as if I owed her anything. Then came the calls. Her parents reached out first, their voices heavy with a mix of concern and entitlement. She's still our daughter, her father said during one particularly tense conversation. And you were her husband. That means something. I let out a hollow laugh. It meant something when she walked out on me, when she lied, cheated, and left me to deal with the fallout alone. Don't talk to me about what it means. Her mother wasn't any better. You were a good man once, she said, her tone sharp. What happened to your compassion? What happened to my compassion? It had been worn down by years of betrayal, by sleepless nights and unanswered questions. It had been shattered alongside the life I thought I was building with their daughter. But the real blow came when the rumors started. Somewhere along the line, Her desperation morphed into a campaign of manipulation. People began to call, their voices filled with concern and judgment. I heard you're refusing to help her. She's got a child to think about now. She said you wouldn't even consider being there for her and the baby. Is that true? She's telling people you're leaving them out in the cold. The audacity of it all was infuriating. Not once did anyone ask about my side of the story. Not once did anyone consider the years of pain and heartache I had endured. Instead, I was cast as the villain in her narrative, the selfish ex-husband who refused to do the right thing. Her tactics became bolder. Her father showed up at my doorstep one evening, his face lined with weariness and frustration. She needs help, he said, as if that simple statement would be enough to sway me. She needed help the day she decided to lie to me, to betray me. I replied, my voice cold. But she didn't ask for it then, did she? She made her choices, and now she has to live with them. He left without another word, his disappointment clear. But I didn't care. I couldn't care. The worst part was the guilt they tried to plant in me, as if I hadn't already spent years carrying the weight of her decisions. I found myself questioning, late at night, if I was being too harsh. Was I really the cold-hearted man they painted me to be? But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the truth, the lies, the betrayal, the abandonment. And then, as quickly as it started, the pressure began to fade. The texts and calls grew less frequent. Her family stopped showing up unannounced. Even the rumors seemed to lose their momentum. It was as if the world finally realized I wasn't going to budge. Still, the damage lingered. I couldn't walk into a cafe or grocery store without wondering who might be whispering about me. Mutual acquaintances avoided my gaze, their judgment hanging in the air like a storm cloud. It was isolating, but in a strange way, it was also freeing. I no longer felt obligated to defend myself or explain my choices. I didn't need anyone's approval to move forward. They could believe whatever they wanted. I knew the truth, and that was enough. What they didn't understand, and likely never would, was that my refusal to take her back wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about holding a grudge or punishing her for the past. It was about self-respect, about knowing my worth and refusing to let someone who had thrown me away dictate my future. Let them talk. Let them judge. At the end of the day, their opinions didn't matter. What mattered was that I was free from her lies, her manipulation, and the weight of a broken marriage I had carried for far too long. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living. The quiet was what struck me first. The kind of quiet that's comforting, not suffocating. It wasn't the absence of noise, but the absence of chaos. No more unexpected knocks at the door. No more calls filled with guilt or judgment. No more shadows from a past that refused to let go. I embraced the silence like an old friend, letting it wrap around me as I began to rebuild my life in earnest. The house, which once felt like a prison filled with memories of her, became a sanctuary. I made it mine in ways I never had before. The walls that once displayed photographs of us now showcased artwork that spoke to me. The furniture she had painstakingly chosen was replaced with pieces I picked for their comfort, not aesthetics. Even the garden, which she'd always neglected, became a source of peace. I spent hours tending to it, finding solace in the simple act of planting something and watching it grow. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control, not over her, not over what had happened, but over myself. And that was enough. I began reconnecting with old friends, the kind who didn't pry into the mess of my past but were just happy to see me again. We'd meet for dinner, share stories about work and life, and laugh in a way that felt unforced and genuine. It was a reminder that not all connections had to be heavy or complicated. Hobbies I'd forgotten about found their way back into my life. I started running again, early in the mornings when the world was still waking up. The rhythmic sound of my feet hitting the pavement became a form of meditation, a way to clear my mind and ground myself in the present. I picked up woodworking too, turning my garage into a small workshop. There was something deeply satisfying about taking raw materials and shaping them into something useful, something beautiful. Work became less of a distraction and more of a passion. Without the constant emotional weight dragging me down, I found myself excelling in ways I hadn't before. Promotions followed, along with new opportunities that reignited my sense of purpose. Occasionally, I'd hear about her, not directly, but through whispers that managed to find their way to me. She was struggling, they said. The job she had taken after leaving me hadn't worked out. Relationships with friends and family were strained, and raising a child on her own was proving harder than she'd anticipated. Each update stirred something in me, but it wasn't the anger or sadness I once felt. It was pity, a hollow kind of sympathy for someone who had built her own prison. But I didn't let those feelings linger. They weren't mine to hold on to anymore. There were moments when the past crept in, uninvited but persistent. A song on the radio, a scent in the air, a memory triggered by something small and inconsequential. I'd pause, let the wave of nostalgia wash over me, and then let it go. The past was a part of me, but it didn't define me. Not anymore. One day, as I was walking through the park, I saw a father playing with his child. The little boy's laughter rang out, pure and unrestrained, as his dad chased him around the playground. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something. Regret, maybe, or longing. I had wanted that once. A family, a child to call my own. But as I stood there, watching from a distance, I realized I didn't feel the ache I once had. My life might not look like the one I'd planned, but it was mine. And it was good. The peace I found wasn't about forgetting what had happened or pretending it hadn't hurt. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and moving forward. It was about understanding that sometimes, the life you rebuild is better than the one you lost. I still had my moments, fleeting thoughts of what could have been, what should have been, but they no longer consumed me. They were like shadows at the edge of a bright day, there but inconsequential. As I walked back home that evening, the sunset casting a golden glow over the city, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. I had survived the storm, weathered the chaos, and come out stronger on the other side. This was my life now, simple, peaceful, and entirely my own. And for the first time, I wouldn't trade it for anything. They say time heals all wounds, but I've learned that time doesn't just heal, it reveals. It uncovers truths you were too hurt to see before, and clears away the fog of pain to show you things as they really are. In the years since she left, I've felt this slow clarity seep into my life. What once felt like an open wound has now become a scar, a reminder of a life I no longer live. And with that clarity came something unexpected, quiet vindication. The first time it happened, I wasn't sure what to make of it. I ran into an old acquaintance at a local cafe, someone who had known both of us back in the day. He hesitated when he saw me, as if unsure whether to approach. Eventually, curiosity, or perhaps guilt, got the better of him, and he came over to say hello. We exchanged pleasantries, talked about work, life, the weather, safe, surface-level topics. But eventually, the conversation turned. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice. "I ran into her a few months back. She didn't look so great." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my expression neutral. "Is that so?" "Yeah," he said, clearly uncomfortable. "She mentioned everything that happened between you two. I mean, not in detail, but enough. Just wanted to say, man, you handled it better than most people would have." It wasn't much, just a few words of acknowledgement, but it stayed with me. For so long, I'd felt like I was the villain in her narrative. But here was someone who saw a sliver of the truth, who recognized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the one at fault. Encounters like that became more frequent over time. Mutual acquaintances, former colleagues, even her own family members would occasionally reach out, their tones cautious but revealing. "She's struggling," one of her old friends told me over coffee. "I think she regrets how everything went down." Regret. It was a heavy word, one I hadn't expected to hear. For years, I had carried the weight of her decisions, believing I was the one who failed, the one who wasn't enough. But now, as the pieces fell into place, I realized it wasn't just me who had lost something. She had too. Her attempts to seek help from others, especially those who knew us both, didn't go unnoticed. People told me how she'd drop hints, subtle and not so subtle, about her situation, how she was starting over, or trying to make things work for her child. Some even hinted that she still held out hope I'd step up, and do the right thing. The audacity of it made me laugh, but it also reminded me of how far I'd come. There was a time when her words, her manipulations, would have shaken me to my core. Now, they barely registered. I saw her once, purely by chance, at the supermarket. She was at the far end of the aisle, her cart filled with diapers and groceries. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of a life she had chosen. For a moment, our eyes met. Her expression was hard to read, a mix of surprise, regret, and something else I couldn't quite place. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I simply nodded and walked away. I didn't need to hear whatever she had to say. There was nothing left to discuss. It wasn't about anger or bitterness anymore. Those emotions had long since faded. It was about boundaries, about protecting the peace I had worked so hard to build. The encounters with mutual acquaintances continued, but I kept my responses brief and polite. When people asked about her, I'd shrug and say, "I hope she's doing well." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. I didn't wish her harm, but I also didn't wish to be part of her story anymore. What surprised me most was how her story seemed to serve as a cautionary tale for others. People would mention her struggles, her choices, and the fallout, often with a sense of pity or even frustration. "She really blew it," one old friend said during a conversation. "You were the best thing that ever happened to her, and she threw it all away." I didn't agree or disagree. I didn't need to. Their words weren't validation. I didn't need that anymore. But they did serve as a reminder of how far I had come. The vindication wasn't loud or triumphant. It didn't come with applause or public recognition. It was quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. It was in the way I no longer felt the need to explain myself, the way I could walk into a room without worrying about whispers or judgment. It was in the life I had rebuilt, the peace I had reclaimed, and the knowledge that I had chosen myself when she hadn't. And as I stood in my new kitchen that evening, sipping a glass of wine and watching the sunset through the window, I felt a sense of contentment that no one could take away. Vindication didn't mean I had one. It meant I had survived. And for me, that was enough. There's a certain clarity that comes with closure, not the kind you get from a heartfelt conversation or a grand resolution, but the kind you give yourself when you finally decide to let go. That's what I felt now. Clarity, peace, and, most importantly, freedom. It wasn't an overnight process. Healing never is. But as time passed, the wounds she left behind turned into scars, faint and barely noticeable, reminders of a past I no longer lived in. The pain that once consumed me had faded, replaced by a quiet understanding of what had been and what could never be again. Reflecting on it all, I saw the lessons hidden in the chaos. Her betrayal taught me resilience. Her departure forced me to confront the parts of myself I had neglected, the dreams I had put on hold to fit into a life that wasn't truly mine. And her return, unexpected and disruptive as it was, gave me the closure I didn't know I needed. For years, I had carried the weight of our failed marriage, convinced that it was my fault, my inadequacies that had driven her away. But now, I saw the truth. Her choices were her own, and they had nothing to do with me. Letting go of that guilt was like shedding a second skin, freeing me to move forward without the baggage of her decisions. My life now was simple but fulfilling. The house, once a source of painful memories, had become a space of comfort and joy. I filled it with things that made me happy: books, music, plants, and art that spoke to me. The garden was thriving, a patch of green that reminded me daily of growth and renewal. I'd made new friends along the way, people who brought light and laughter into my life without the weight of the past. My days were filled with work I enjoyed, hobbies that challenged me, and moments of stillness that I had learned to cherish. Sometimes, I'd hear about her through mutual acquaintances or the occasional social media post. The updates were few and far between, but they always carried the same undertone: struggle. She was still trying to piece her life together, still chasing something she could never quite grasp. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction when I heard these things. What I felt was indifference. Her story was no longer mine to carry, and her struggles no longer affected me. I wished her well, silently and without ceremony, but I kept her at a distance where she belonged. There was one moment, not too long ago, that stayed with me. I was walking through the park on a crisp autumn morning when I saw a father playing with his young son. The boy's laughter echoed through the air as they kicked a soccer ball back and forth. For a fleeting second, I thought of the family I had once dreamed of, the life I had planned before it all fell apart. But the ache I used to feel in moments like this was gone. In its place was acceptance. My life might not look like the one I had envisioned, but it was mine, and it was good. I had finally moved on for good. Not just from her, but from the man I used to be, the one who sought validation through someone else, who believed his worth was tied to his ability to fit into a mold that was never meant for him. Now, I knew better. I had built a life that was authentic and true, one that brought me peace and fulfillment. I no longer felt the need to explain myself or seek approval from others. My choices were mine alone, and I stood by them with confidence and pride. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. I had survived the storm, weathered the pain, and come out stronger on the other side. This was my life now, simple, peaceful, and entirely my own. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was truly free.